Good evening and welcome to News Night. I'm Amritpal Singh. This is a show in which we tell you what happened around the country and the world in the day just gone by. Well, much happened. There were massive rallies in Milan ahead of the COP26 meeting, or the Conference of Parties meeting, which is slated to take place in Glasgow in the United Kingdom later, but a pre-COP26 meeting was held in Milan, where major countries put out their ideas of how they wish to prepare for COP26. India stressed on the need for building consensus on operationalizing the Paris rule book, or the commitments made under the operationalization of the commitments made under the Paris agreements. We'll talk about that and the other news that made headlines. Well, in the nation, Shura Khan's son was arrested today. He's been sent to a one-day police custody to the Narcotics Bureau. We'll talk about that and major drug rackets which were busted across the country on Sunday. But first up, the headlines we're tracking at this hour. Major strikes against illegal drug trade. Rave party on a Mumbai to Goa luxury cruise busted. Several arrests made, including Shah Rukh Khan's son Aryan. Army seizes nearly 30 kg of heroin worth over 30 crore from the LOC near Uri. BSF arrests Pakistani drug smuggler in Punjab. Results of Qatar's first Legislative Council election announced, with none of the close to 30 female candidates winning at the polls. From a nursing manager, an industrial engineer to a foreign ministry worker, women from many walks of life had stood for elections. Shura Council is an advisory legislative body in Qatar for which the elections took place. Explosion outside a mosque in Kabul kills at least 2 persons and injures at least 3 others, according to Taliban. Security tightened in the Afghan capital. Pre-COP26 meet in Milan ends amidst protests by youth activists demanding action. COP26 president says consensus around the need to deliver on the $100 billion per year pledge of the developed countries. India to work constructively towards bridging gaps in implementing temperature goal of the Paris Agreement. British military tanker personnel to step in starting Monday to help ease fuel crisis. 200 personnel will complete their training over the weekend. Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the crisis is demand-driven, adds immigration is not a solution for shortage of workers. India's reciprocal conditional travel norms for UK citizens begin from Sunday midnight. They include mandatory 10-day quarantine and RT-PCR test on arrival at the airport. British travel rules for Indian citizens also kick in from the October 4th. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal visits the UAE pavilion at the Dubai Expo 2020, addresses chartered accountants at the event organized by ICAI Dubai chapter, says 75 years of independence is the time to reflect on achievements and prepare vision for next 25 years when India completes 100 years of independence in 2047. Foreign Secretary Harsh Shringla visits Trincomalee oil tank from a key India-Sri Lanka economic partnership link, arrives in Jaffna, visits the iconic Jaffna Cultural Centre built with Indian grant assistance. And India and Australia draw in the women's pink ball test at the Carrara Oval. Smriti Mandhana named the player of the match for her excellent innings of 127 in India's first ever pink ball match. So those were the headlines, and now the news in details. Sunday saw a major crackdown on drug rackets across the country. The Narcotics Control Bureau, or the NCB, on Sunday arrested 3 persons, including Aryan Khan, the son of Bollywood superstar Shura Khan, in connection with the seizure of banned drugs on board a cruise ship off Mumbai's coast. Aryan, along with the other arrested, was sent to 1 day of police custody.
A massive drive against drugs and narcotics was carried out in different parts of the country. Along with local police, Narcotics Control Bureau made multiple arrests. First up, Mumbai. NCB raided a luxury cruise heading to Goa from Mumbai. The agency detained 8 people who were accused of taking drugs. All of them were interrogated and later 3 were arrested. Medical examinations were conducted and they were produced in Kila Court.
एक दिन का कस्टडी कोर्ट ने हमारे रिमांड एप्लीकेशन पे तीनों अक्यूज को दिया है. मैटर को कल रखा हुआ है. हमारा रिमांड एप्लीकेशन के कोर्ट ने की सुनवाई होने के बाद कोर्ट ने ये फैसला किया है.
3 arrested includes Aryan Khan, Arbaz Merchant and Munmun Dhamicha. Aryan Khan is a son of film actor Shah Rukh Khan. Drugs like MDMA, ecstasy, cocaine, MD or mephedrone and cannabis were recovered from the spot. NCB Zonal Director Sameer Wankhede led this raid. NCB officials boarded the cruise in advance and raided the party when it began. During the operation, the suspects were searched and drugs were recovered which they hid in their clothes and purse. The Bureau says that the raid is the result of a 2-week-long investigation and intelligence gathering. Links with Bollywood have been exposed.
लगातार हम लोग इंटेलिजेंस गैदर कर रहे थे और ये भी था कि इनपुट्स पक्के हो जाएं, पुख्ता हो जाएं, उसके बाद कार्रवाई होगी. तो इनपुट जब पुख्ता हो गए उसके बाद ही कार्रवाई की गई है. और इनपुट्स जब ये बताने लगे कि ड्रग्स कैरी किए जा रहे हैं, चरस MDM कैरी किया जा रहा है, साथ ही ड्रग्स का इस्तेमाल होने वाला है, तभी कार्रवाई हुई.
The NCB says that the inputs that are being received from the arrested people can be considered as proof. An operation would be taken for several days. Action will be taken against whosoever is found in this network, irrespective of their status.
समान पैमाने से कार्रवाई करना और उसी पैमाने से हम लोग कार्रवाई कर रहे हैं और लगातार ये कार्रवाई आगे भी जारी रहेगी. और जो भी इसमें नेटवर्क में शामिल पाए जाएंगे, चाहे वो किसी भी ओहदे के लोग हों, कार्रवाई होगी.
Meanwhile, a big news has come from near the line of control in Jammu and Kashmir. The army has seized 25 to 30 kgs of heroin and other drugs in the Uri sector near the line of control. Its cost is being said to be more than 30 crores. The credit for the successful operation goes to the soldiers deployed along the LOC who were successful in stopping the supply of illegal drugs from across the border to Kashmir. An investigation has been initiated into the matter and the police claim to have busted the module involved in illegal drug smuggling in the district.
This has been recovered by the troops of the Indian Army and the same has been further handed over to us, and legal proceedings in the matter have been initiated. Upon a basic weighing, including all the seized material, this has come to around 25 to 30 kgs of contraband that has been recovered from the site. Other than this, there are other seizures that have been found at the spot. These includes one cap, there are a couple of backpacks, there are a couple of gunny bags, and the same will be displayed to you soon after the press conference. And these have markings of made in Pakistan, and other Pakistani markings are there on these bags. The huge quantity of contraband which as per the current black market evaluation is coming to around 20 to 25 crores.
In the meantime, BSF arrested a Pakistani smuggler close to the border in Amritsar's Rajatal in the wee hours of Sunday. BSF also recovered 6 packets of heroin from the smuggler. The packets were kept in a Pakistani-made bag.
हमारी पार्टी ने सर्च लॉन्च किया और सर्च लॉन्च करने के बाद में हमने डॉग्स को यूज़ किया और उसके उपरांत 6 पैकेट हेरोइन पकड़ पाए हम लोग और साथ में एक स्मगलर जो छुपा हुआ था उसको भागने नहीं दिया और उसको उन्होंने पकड़ लिया.
In fact, strict action is being taken against illegal narcotics trade and large consignment of drugs that have been seized in the recent times. Several Bollywood stars are under scrutiny after the death of actor Sushant Singh Rajput in Mumbai last year. With Yogesh Sheetal from Mumbai, News Night Desk, DD India.
All right, changing tack now. Ahead of the COP26 UN Summit on Climate Change, young people met in Milan to pressure the world leaders before they meet at the end of this month. Thousands took to the streets of the Italian city on Saturday to push policymakers to take action. Meanwhile, the president of COP26, Alok Sharma, stressed on the need to deliver on the $100 billion per year pledge by developed countries in the pre-COP meeting. India promised to work constructively towards bridging gaps in implementing temperature goals of Paris Agreement.
Thousands of climate activists marched through Milan to make their point as leaders met for the pre-COP26 summit. Activists from all over Italy converged in the streets of the financial capital, calling on policymakers to match words with action and stump up billions of dollars to wean the world off fossil fuels during a year that has seen record-breaking heat waves, floods and fires. But the problem of climate change does not only concern the younger generation.
I do my part every day, and we should all do our part for the planet. But that's not enough. We have to make governments understand that they have to do something, not just talk a lot and do nothing.
I'm almost 70 years old. I have been fighting for decades, and these guys gave me hope that these struggles can continue.
I'm here because in these days in Milan there is the pre-COP and the world leaders have met to discuss the policy to face the climate crisis, but are not listening to us young people and to us people in general, and we want to be listened.
COP26 President Alok Sharma said that delegates heading to the COP26 UN Climate Summit in Glasgow agreed they must deliver on the $100 billion per year pledge to help most vulnerable nations tackle climate change. While US climate envoy John Kerry said the world could rapidly move towards the goals on reduction of emissions ahead of Glasgow COP26 UN Climate Summit that will be held in November. Kerry pledged the United States will decarbonize ground transport by a shift to electric vehicles by 2030, aiming at a carbon-free power sector by 2035.
There was a discussion around and consensus around the fact that we need to deliver on the 100 billion a year, but I think the delivery on the 100 billion is going to be vital, and that's why we are putting together a delivery plan together with our colleagues. Everybody acknowledged that Glasgow is going to be a critical point for setting ambition in this decisive decade, and there were a number of areas that were highlighted. First, I think there was consensus that we needed to do more in terms of keeping the 1.5 degrees within reach and what that might mean for NDCs going forward.
As we stand here today, we believe we can make enormous progress in Glasgow, moving rapidly towards the new goals that the science is telling us we must achieve. The United States of America is on its way with a plan to have our entire power sector be carbon-free by 2035. We will have shifted to an economy based on electric. Those are ambitious goals. They're big goals, but they're doable. And the private sector is joining into these kinds of initiatives.
Representing India virtually at the pre-COP26 meeting, Union Minister for Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Bhupendra Yadav, assured that India will engage constructively at COP26 and evaluate bridging proposals to conclude the Paris rulebook, which can be done by delivering on the climate finance promises of the developed countries. A colourful wave of climate activists flooded the streets of Milan as young people urged world leaders to keep their promises on the fight against climate change. Thousands of young people marched through the streets of the city to hammer out proposals to tackle global warming that will be vetted by climate and energy ministers over the coming days before being sent to the Glasgow conference next month. Some of their key demands include meaningful participation in all decision-making on climate change, call for an end to use of fossil fuels by 2030, transparent climate finance systems, responsible and sustainable tourism. Climate and energy ministers vetted these demands in their pre-COP26 meeting, and the hope is that some will find their way to the Glasgow summit.
I hope that the world leaders have finally realized that it's time to act and do something. I hope that with these demonstrations, they really start to implement what they have promised so far. I hope they listen to us.
Climate change is embedded in India's development strategy, and India has been a front runner in taking ambitious climate action. However, India has a large population that is vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Hence, adaptation is among the top priorities for India. India strongly believes that COP26 must initiate the process of setting the new collective long-term climate finance goal for post-2020. The COP26 conference in Glasgow aims to secure more ambitious climate action from the nearly 200 countries that signed the 2015 Paris Agreement and agreed to limit human-caused global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Newsnight Desk, DD India.
So let's try and understand visually what COP26 is about, what the key priorities at COP26 would be before world leaders, and what are the differences that exist and can they really be bridged. If I can ask my producer to please put it on the air. Now, at COP26, basically countries, all countries must, especially the major emitters, must commit to deep emission cuts by 2030, and that's in line with the 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature target that was agreed upon at the Paris summit. The other thing is that developed countries must significantly scale up the climate finance and make it accessible. $100 billion fund per year has been pledged, but that's falling short of that. There is a consensus that you need that kind of money, but that sort of money the countries are not putting in, at least for now. So COP26 will be taking that up in a major way. More finance and tracking for adaptation. Now that would be also major at this COP26. One will have to see now these differences exist, or there is a general consensus at the Conference of Parties that this is an issue that they need to address, but when it comes to doing things about it or taking bold actions, then is when countries fall short of it. Tackling climate induced losses and damages with seriousness and solidarity. Now there's a difference between the developed countries and the developing countries from where those finances would come, and the developing countries accuse the developed countries of not being serious or playing their part in it, adopting long overdue and robust rules for the Paris Agreement. Now things were agreed at the Paris Agreement, but they haven't become operational. So the need to operationalize the Paris Agreement. Now let's look at what India's stand is, and India and Bhupendra Yadav, the environment minister, made that clear at the pre-COP meeting held in Milan. Now India promises to engage constructively at COP26. India says it will play its part for constructive discussions. India will evaluate bridging the proposals to conclude the Paris rule book. Differences exist between different countries. India would work towards bridging those gaps and look at the proposals. We'll discuss operationalizing the global goal on adaptation. That's what the Indian minister said. Now COP26 must also initiate long-term climate finance goal post 2020, the goal of setting up that fund and operationalizing that fund. Now the COP26 outcome must emphasize on the need to enhance climate action of the developing countries. This is what the environment minister spoke at the COP26. So, the pre-COP26 meeting. Now, COP26, which is slated for later this month, will have to address these issues. And that brings us to our In Focus tonight, road ahead and challenges for COP26. To discuss that, I have with me R.R. Rashmi. He's a distinguished fellow at the TERI. He was also Special Secretary in the Ministry of Environment. I'm also joined by Mohan Kumar. Mohan Kumar is a former diplomat, and he's currently the chairman of the RIS. So that we'll talk about our In Focus tonight, the road ahead and the challenges for COP26. Now, let me welcome both gentlemen. First to you, Ambassador Kumar. As we approach every COP, every meeting at COP25, things are talked about, pledges are made, but countries fall short of fulfilling those commitments. There are accusations and counter accusations on who's responsible, how much can countries do, what sort of money will come in, and when there is a broader agreement, yes, you need that sort of money. One sees countries falling short of their target, both on emissions cuts and the money, the technology to deal with the challenge, which everybody agrees is a collective challenge.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. I think this has been the story of these negotiations in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. You have the question of responsibility, who's responsible for these historical emissions, what we call legacy emissions, and then of course the current emissions. So whichever way you look at it, I think the responsibility lies first with historical emitters, which would be, I would say, EU, United States, UK. And then you've got China, which is actually the big elephant in the room, if you ask me. It is responsible for 27% of global emissions. It consumes more coal than the entire world put together. And its own emissions in 2019 exceeded that of the cumulative emissions of developed countries. So China is big, whichever way you look at it, and it will be important to see what China says. It's not enough to say, I'm going to stop financing of coal plants outside my country. There have been massive power cuts in China, and China will be consuming much more coal this year than it did last year. So there are issues with regard to China, with regard to the developed countries. For India, I think as the minister pointed out, for us, climate finance is key. I was present in Paris. I was ambassador when the negotiations were launched and they were concluded. India actually significantly became a part of the solution in Paris. Previously, you could accuse India of having been part of the problem. From Paris, India has taken a very constructive line. We are trying to be part of the solution. You will recall that we launched the International Solar Alliance. So nobody can really point a finger at India. As far as India is concerned, the nationally determined contributions will have to be submitted, and these will have to be updated. I don't know what the present situation is. We haven't submitted an updated NDC, and countries will want to see a more ambitious, nationally determined contribution from India. But I would say you're right. The issues really are, what are the developed countries and China going to put on the table? What is climate finance going to look like? And what are we going to see in terms of carbon markets? So these really are the big issues that await solution in Glasgow.
Served in the ministry when this whole policy was being made and there was a change in Indian policy. When these negotiations happen, let's look at, say, COP25 to COP26 now is around the anvil. Have we traveled some distance from COP24 to 25 to 26? Is there a forward movement, or there is general talks and a broader agreement and agree to agree but not agree to do?
Thank you very much for inviting me to your talk. The most fundamental change that has happened in the last 2 years is that the US is back in the game. After the Paris Agreement, after the change in the Obama administration, Trump actually trumped the Paris Agreement. And he said that US is not going to do much at all about climate change. So that's a remarkable change. That's a positive change which has happened after the Biden administration has put US back into the system as far as climate negotiations are concerned. And the secondly, that immediately after they joined they decided to join the Paris Agreement, they have announced a net zero goal. So this is actually now the framework in which the COP26 is being held. Of course, there are many unresolved issues. One unresolved issue is that of the carbon markets, the adaptation goals, and the perennial issue of how the climate finance will be mobilized of the $100 billion and more to meet both the requirements of mitigation and adaptation. But the challenge before the developing countries at COP26, and particularly for countries like India, would be that of resisting the attempts to shift the goalpost from 2030 to 2050. Under the Paris Agreement, the countries have submitted their NDCs either in the time frame of 2025 or 2030. Now, the immediate task before all the countries is to ensure that the progress that they make substantive and transparent progress towards achieving these goals which they have promised by 2030. Unfortunately, except a few countries which can be counted on the fingertips, most of the countries have failed in doing so, including the US. It's only some European countries, the Scandinavian ones, the UK, and EU as a whole, that they are almost about to fulfill their NDCs. But the larger story in the rest of the world is that the rest of the world is not on track to meet either the 2-degree goal or the 1.5-degree goal in terms of the NDCs expressed for 2030. India is in a comfortable position. In fact, the assessment made by the Climate Transparency till last year was that India is consistently doing well. It is progressing on track to achieving the 2-degree consistent goal. It may be a little insufficient for 1.5 degree, but 1.5 degree is actually an option. The first task before us is to ensure that the climate stabilization takes place at 2 degree, which is a part of the agreement achieved at Paris. So the challenge before India is to ensure that the countries don't change their attention, change their goalpost from 2030 to 2050, which is happening because of these the net zero announcements. Net zero announcements are an announcement in the long term. In the long term, as Keynes used to say, everyone is dead. And we don't know what might happen, because even the countries which have announced these net zero goals for decarbonization, they haven't announced any action plan for achieving this. The action plan is actually the NDCs. So we must adhere to the negotiations to ensure that the 2030 NDCs are fulfilled, and we must remain riveted to that particular goal. And climate finance is an important instrument for achieving this. The developing countries need resources for doing that. They, of course, are mobilizing their own resources. India is doing that, and that's why it's moving positively. But it will need to do much more. But the IPCC special report on 1.5 degree had said that the emissions must come down by 45% by 2030. We are nowhere near that. The NDC synthesis report says that we are well short of that, and the responsibility falls on the developed countries, as Ambassador Mohan Kumar has said.
Okay. Ambassador Kumar, as you said, you were in Paris when, you were serving in Paris when these negotiations happened for the Paris Agreement. Both you and Secretary Rashmi are no longer in the government. So you can speak your mind now. The fact remains, when we talk about India, we say, well, we are leading the International Solar Alliance, we are doing this, we've changed track, and now we are part of the solution. But the fact remains that we are a major emitter of the world. Every country advances, as you were saying. China says we'll shut down all our plants, coal plants abroad. Japan and Korea did that earlier. Other countries say, well, look, we've committed so much money, we'll do so, there's a promise of more. So every country puts forward saying that, look, we are doing what we can and we promise to do more. But the situation at hand is that if everybody doesn't do the requisite, we all go down together. So what is the way out? What is the way forward, really?
So I think it's important to get the correct measure of the problem first. You have to look at the percentage emissions of these big emitters. You've got China at 27%, 2019 statistics. You've got United States at 12%. You've then got India at 6.6% of the global emissions. You've got EU at 6.4. You've got countries like Indonesia, Japan, Russia, and so on at 3% apiece. So I do honestly believe that United States and China are responsible for we are looking easily at about 40% of global emissions. These are big economies. They are the two largest economies. The action must begin there. I'm not suggesting that other countries completely keep quiet. If you take India, for example, I would be very interested in knowing whether the target announced by the Prime Minister for the 450 gigawatts by 2035 solar energy, if that can be converted to a nationally determined contribution by India, that would be wonderful. But to expect India to completely get rid of coal is not realistic. To expect India to have a net zero by 2050 would not be realistic. What is realistic is to encourage India to do more and more renewable energy. It is in India's abiding interest to reduce the consumption of coal. By the way, unlike Japan, Korea, and China, we do not finance coal projects abroad. Not too much anyway. It's very insignificant. So the problem in India is domestic coal consumption. And it is true that our power sector is dependent on coal for 60%. But I think the way out for India is really to increase the share of renewable energy in its power matrix. I've always argued that there is a lot of symbiotic relationship between energy poverty and economic poverty. There are 300 million Indians who don't have access to electricity 24/7.
True.
They don't. And I think until we resolve that issue, to expect India to kind of say that we will get rid of coal by 2030 or 2040 would be difficult. I will certainly bow to somebody like Mr. Rashmi because he probably knows more about this subject than I do. My sense is, if you take the impartial non-government organization www.climateaction.org, as Mr. Rashmi says, India is doing well. Whatever we have said in Paris, we have more than met those targets. My worry for India is twofold. I'll be blunt. One, we have to make sure climate finance is available. Two, we have to make sure there is nothing like a carbon border adjustment tax by entities like EU against Indian exports merely because India may be seen as a polluter. And thirdly, I do believe we must watch out for adaptation.
Right.
Everyone keeps talking of mitigation. The problem for countries like India and other developing countries, small island countries, is climate change is a reality. And India is a victim. So we need to spend much more on adaptation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Rashmi, I would have loved to take this forward, but unfortunately that's all the time I have for. We'll see, we'll have to wait and see what transpires at COP26. Both gentlemen, many thanks for joining me on the debate tonight. Thank you. And let's talk about Qatar elections. No woman candidate was elected in Qatar's first legislative council election, with results coming in on Sunday evening. Qatari citizens voted on Saturday in the Gulf Arab states' first legislative elections for 2/3 of the advisory Shura Council, a process that has stirred domestic debate about electoral inclusion and citizenship.
The results of Qatar's first Legislative Council election have been announced, with none of the female candidates winning at the polls. From a nursing manager, an industrial engineer to a foreign ministry worker, 26 women participated among 233 candidates. Results showed none of the women who were part of the polls were elected, disappointing candidates who had wanted to lend a voice for women and other Qataris in the country's political process.
I just say I'm strong I'm capable. I see myself. I'm same fit like you as a man. I don't see myself. I am weaker. If you want to see me as a weak, that is up to you. But I am not a weak. I'm in administrations.
No one can put a standard for women what to do and what she can do and what she cannot do. I would take it myself as a challenge, to challenge myself and to challenge those people who think that the women cannot.
The Shura Council has legislative authority and approves general state policies and the budget, but has no say in the setting of defense, security, economic and investment policy for the country. Qatari citizens voted on Saturday in the Gulf Arab states' first legislative elections for 2/3 of the advisory Shura Council. Turnout for the election of 30 members of the 45-seat body was 63.5%. The Election Supervisory Committee said several female candidates had been seeking to improve the integration into Qatari society of children of female citizens married to foreigners who, like in other Gulf states, cannot pass their Qatari nationality to their children.
The important subject I have focused on is to set up an association that takes care of the family and the child, that raises women's problems to the responsible authorities, because there are some women and families who don't know who can help solve their problems.
Representation of women in Qatar is stronger than in its Gulf neighbours, with the Health Ministry led by a woman and the Foreign Ministry represented by a spokeswoman. Women also hold prominent roles in the World Cup Organising Committee, as well as philanthropy and the arts, medicine, law and business. Newsnight Desk, DD India.
And to talk more about that, I'm joined by Anil Kumar Trigunath, former diplomat. Sir, thank you very much for joining me on the debate. Let me ask you, what is the relevance of this election, where we saw women participating in huge numbers, 26 out of 233 candidates were women, and what is the relevance or the importance or the significance of no woman getting elected despite more than 10% women standing in elections?
Well, you know that the significance is that the Shura Council has existed for about 50 years. And in 50 years, it has no elections at all. And most of the monarchies, as you know, except probably Kuwait, which is a very noisy parliament, all the Shura Councils are there, but the elections are always and have been an issue. So this is a step forward. As far as the women are concerned, one can see that they have very specific issues that they wish to deal with. But this is also reflective that the society is probably on their own, are not that supportive of the women candidate coming to power. But one has to grant the Amir, because he is basically a very forward-looking and a reform-oriented person. And we have seen that during the blockade of Qatar by Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Bahrain and Egypt, that in the Shura Council, he has been nominating women, and the first thing he did was bring about 4 women to be nominated to that. So of these 15, which are remaining now, 30 are representing the 30 constituencies, these people. But then the women are being co-opted in that capacity. As far as the election is concerned, that shows the state of the society and the mindset exactly that how the men would look at the women going forward. So it is a step forward, but I think they have still got a way to go. And as you know that in the whole of the Arab world, basically after the Arab Spring in 2010, the demand of the people, and especially the people who were disenfranchised, has been growing everywhere for greater participation, a stronger voice. And I think that this is a natural move forward, apart from the fact that Qatar is also going to host the 2022 FIFA election, for which it is working very hard, and next month they will also have Arab Cup. So they want to show to the world that they are in the same kind of a league. Of course, every country will have the kind of democracy depending on its cultural and historical tendency.
But Ambassador, would you see this as some sort of a forward movement in the wider Arab world, the Islamic world, where women at least are now starting to demand their rights? Could it have some impact in, say, Afghanistan, where, you know, at least women were protesting earlier, the previous Taliban regime? The fear would have been so much that they would have been shot dead. Here, they at least came out on the streets. They have no representation in the government. They're still grappling with questions about whether to go to universities and schools and have genders segregated classrooms, etc. But is it some sort of a rumbling of a forward movement, greater voice of women in society?
No, I agree with you. I mean, in Qatar, in fact, many people would know that in 2003, Zufaira was the first woman who contested the municipal elections and won. And apart from that, their UN ambassador to the United Nations is actually a lady. And Qatar has also, which has a great stakes and some kind of influence over Afghanistan process today, has been openly telling the Afghan and Taliban that the women have to be given their due rights. And so that is something that they are trying to project themselves as some kind of a reformist in the region. Because as you know, most of the countries in the Gulf are still monarchies, all of them, and they are basically are a bit, in my view, fearful of democracy and protest and movement. Even in Qatar, there were protests in July, August, September, 3 months. I mean, June, July, August, we saw the protests happening there. So it has provided people, I think, some kind of a conduit to express their opinion, and the elected officials can go down and talk to their constituents, represent their views, and try to work on in a more concerted manner to represent the interests of the people, and in a way act as, in my view, to diffuse the crisis from building up.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Many thanks, Ambassador Trignath, for joining us and sharing your insights with us this evening. Thank you. And in Kabul, armed Taliban were guarding a mosque in Kabul on Sunday after 2 civilians were killed in an explosion nearby. According to the Taliban spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid, the blast happened near the entrance of the Eidgah Mosque in Afghanistan's capital. The details behind the explosion were not immediately clear, and Mujahid did not say exactly how many had died. Taliban has put the number at 2 right now, but there are claims of more. The blast occurred on the main road just outside the Eidgah Mosque, where a prayer ceremony for Mujahid's mother was underway. Another Taliban official told a news agency that at least 2 civilians were killed and 3 were wounded in the blast. No one has claimed responsibility for the blast so far. The Islamic State recently claimed responsibility for bomb attacks in the eastern city of Jalalabad in Afghanistan. All right. The Union Minister of Commerce and Industry, Piyush Goyal, addressed the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India in Dubai. He also visited the UAE pavilion in the ongoing Dubai Expo 2020.
Union Minister of Commerce and Industry Piyush Goyal on Sunday addressed the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India in Dubai. Piyush Goyal said that India is making resurgent stride towards a $5 trillion economy. The minister said that several programs have been launched by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in India to transform the lives of the poor and underprivileged section of the society.
For this 20 days, 21 days, all of us in India are making a serious effort to have an outreach to the less privileged, to the marginalized sections of society. Several programs are being carried out all across the country by, I would think, millions of Indians voluntarily to give a message of solidarity with Prime Minister Narendra Modi and recognizing the huge contribution that he has done for the country through his relentless work to transform the lives of the people of India.
The minister said the 75th anniversary of India's independence is an occasion to prepare a vision for 25 years. He also said that the government is working on a vision to provide a quality life to each and every citizen when India completes 100 years of its independence.
When India completes 100 years in 2047, we are working to a goal, we are working to tangible outcomes, a defined agenda. An agenda where every Indian has a better quality of life. We can take prosperity to our villages. We ensure good health care, good education for every single child, every single old person. We ensure good work, quality work with fair incomes for every able-bodied young man and woman. We care for those lesser privileged. In every possible way, take the country to greater heights.
Piyush Goyal also visited the UAE Pavilion. The UAE Pavilion takes centre stage at the heart of Dubai's Expo site, with a design described as a symbolic interpretation of the flow of movement. Newsnight Desk, DD India.
And let's talk about the United Kingdom, where thousands of gas stations are facing an acute lack of fuel because of post-Brexit shortage of truck drivers and panic buying from consumers. The supply of drivers has diminished as a result of the changes to the visa rules, causing tens of thousands of European drivers to leave Britain.
The crisis doesn't seem to be letting up in the UK. Monday will see military tanker drivers deployed to deliver fuel after a chaotic week of shortages that has resulted in panic buying and hoarding. A defensive Boris Johnson pinned the blame on problems driven by demand.
The situation is stabilising, but it's a problem that has been driven really by demand, not by supply.
In a TV interview on Sunday, Johnson asserted that immigration is not a solution to the shortage of drivers, which in turn has led to disruptions in fuel supply.
The way forward for our country is not to just pull the big lever marked uncontrolled immigration and allow in huge numbers of people.
I'm sorry, Prime Minister, let me just come back to my original question, which you may have forgotten.
The old failed model.
My original question,
low wages,
which you may have forgotten.
Low skills, supported by uncontrolled immigration. What we would rather do is help people into better paid, better skilled jobs, which is what is happening.
The UK government plans to issue 300 temporary visas to foreign truck drivers to help ease the shortages. Ministers say the world is facing a global shortage of truck drivers and that they are working to ease the crisis. They deny that the situation is a consequence of an exodus of the European Union workers following Britain's departure from the bloc and have dismissed concerns the country is heading towards a winter of shortages and power cuts. Several sectors of the economy are in a state of disarray and deliveries of fuel and medicines have also been disrupted. Newsnight Desk, DD India.
And well, UK nationals arriving in India will have to undergo mandatory 10-day quarantine from Sunday midnight, weeks after the UK imposed similar restrictions on Indian travellers. The British travel rules also kick in from October 4th. All UK nationals arriving in India from the UK, irrespective of their vaccination status, will undergo a mandatory quarantine at home or in destination address for 10 days after arrival in India. A pre-departure COVID-19 RT-PCR test within 72 hours before travel will have to be done. A RT-PCR test on arrival at the airport and an RT-PCR test on day 8 after arrival is also mandatory now. Well, in the United States, women marched in thousands over the weekend at the Texas Capitol and cities across the U.S. to protest increasing state restrictions on abortion and advocate for maintaining a constitutional right to the procedure. The 660 demonstrations around the U.S. were largely sparked by a Texas law that bans abortions after about 6 weeks of pregnancy. The measure, which went into effect last month, is the most restrictive in the country.
Anger and betrayal were the dominant sentiments across many parts of USA over the weekend as women's rights advocates gathered to protest against the country's most restrictive abortion.
Well, tropical cyclone Shaheen bore down on Oman, prompting authorities to delay flights to and from capital Muscat and to urge residents to evacuate coastal areas. The eye of the storm was about 60 kilometers from Muscat and carried top winds of 120 kilometers per hour or more. The storm center was expected to hit land during late afternoon and evening, bringing very heavy winds and heavy rainfall. The National Emergency Committee said excuse me, the power supply would be cut off in Al-Khurm, east of the capital, to avoid accidents, and more than 2,700 people were put up in emergency shelters. Roads in the capital would be open only to vehicles on emergency and humanitarian journeys until the storm dies down. New Zealand's Delta variant outbreak spread beyond the largest city of Auckland, prompting Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern to put additional regions into a snap lockdown. There were 32 new coronavirus cases on Sunday in Auckland, which has been in lockdown since mid-August, and 2 cases in the Waikato region south of Auckland. Ardern said that parts of the region will go into a 5-day lockdown. The Auckland outbreak currently stands at 1,328 cases. Full vaccination will become a requirement for non-New Zealand citizens arriving in the country from November 1st. Foreign Secretary Harsha Shringla is in Sri Lanka on a 4-day visit. He visited the Trincomalee oil tank farm, a key India-Sri Lanka economic partnership link. According to the Indian High Commission, he was briefed about developments undertaken at the tank farm and the possibilities for further strengthening India and Sri Lanka energy partnership to enhance Sri Lanka's energy security. His next stop was Jaffna, where he was extended a warm welcome by India's Consul General in Jaffna and Chairman of the Northern Provincial Council, CVK Siva Gangam. Officials from Civil Aviation Authority briefed Shringla about the developments and rehabilitation of the Palali Airport. Foreign Secretary also visited the iconic Jaffna Cultural Center built with Indian grant assistance. The iconic state-of-the-art cultural center will help people of Northern Province reconnect with their roots and in nurturing the shared cultural heritage. Well, talking about the COVID situation in the country, fresh COVID infections in the country on Sunday fell by a little over 1,500 from Saturday's figures, with the country reporting 22,842 new infections in the last 24 hours. Though the active cases in the country are at a 199-day low, Director of AIIMS, Dr. Randeep Guleria, has warned that the next 6 to 8 weeks are crucial given the festival season to control the spread of the infection. Meanwhile, India's vaccination coverage crossed the 90 crore landmark milestone on Sunday.
India continues to battle the COVID-19 pandemic. The country's recovery rate currently stands at 97.87%, which is highest since March 2020. India's vaccination coverage has crossed 90 crore landmark milestone on Sunday. Over 90 crore 51 lakh vaccine doses have been administered across the country so far. As schools have started opening up, preparations are being made for vaccinating children across country.
Once the adults are immunized, we have about 44 crore children below 18 years. And we are prepared. The platforms and the processes are in place, and some additional requirements of giving immunization to children, that also will be done. So we are ready to immunize all the children in the same speed as we have done it for adults. Immediately we have one vaccine, Zycov-D, which is a DNA vaccine. It is safe and effective for children 12 to 17 years. So we are going to prioritize vaccine for those children who have comorbidities and severe comorbidities, so that we immediately immunize them, and the rest of the children can be those who are healthy, can be immunized subsequently.
In the national capital, religious places have been opened for the devotees with COVID protocol in place.
जो सरकार का दिशा निर्देश है उसका पालन करते हुए भक्तों को दर्शन कराएं.
As festival season is around the corner, AIIMS Director Dr. Randeep Guleria has said that the next 6 to 8 weeks are very crucial. All need to follow COVID appropriate guidelines and any sort of negligence can worsen the situation. Weekly positivity rate remains below 3% for last 100 days and is currently at 1.66%. Daily positivity rate is also less than 3% for last 34 days and is now at 1.8%. Testing capacity in India has also been ramped up. More than 57.32 crore samples have been tested so far across the country. Newsnight Desk, DD India.
And let's now take a look at what else made news across the country.
In West Bengal, ruling Trinamool Congress has won by polls in Bhawanipur, Shamsherganj and Jangipur assembly seats. The three constituencies went to poll on 30th September. Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee defeated rival BJP's Priyanka Tibrewal by a record margin of 58,835 votes. Biju Janata Dal candidate Rudra Pratap Maharti defeated Bharatiya Janata Party candidate Ashit Patnaik in Pipli assembly seats in Odisha. In Gujarat, peaceful polling for Gandhinagar Municipal Corporation and three municipalities in Oka, Bhandwa and Thara were conducted. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's mother, Hiraben, cast a vote in election for the Gandhinagar Municipal Corporation. On the second day of his visit to Himachal Pradesh, Union Information and Broadcasting Minister Anurag Thakur addressed the youth conference organized as Tawni Devi and stressed on the role of the youth in nation building. He called for a proper disposal of plastic waste. He reviewed many developmental works being carried out in the region. NIA, along with the Jammu and Kashmir Police, CRP and ITBP conducted searches at 9 locations in Poonch district of Jammu and Kashmir at the premises of LOC traders. The case relates trader financing from Pakistan via Cross LOC Trade Facilitation Center located at Islamabad and Uri in Baramulla district and Chakandabag in Poonch district. These funds were purportedly being used for financing terrorism and separatism in Jammu and Kashmir.
Let's talk about the cricket now. India's women team put up a highly commendable performance, dominating Australia for the better part in its maiden day-night test, which ended in a draw, primarily due to inclement weather during the first 2 days. Resuming the day at 143 for 3, Alice Perry, 68 not out, and Ashley Gardner, 51, went on to sheer 89-run stand before Indian pacers triggered the batting collapse, reducing Australia to 241 for 9 from 208 for 4. What followed was an interesting declaration from Meg Lanning at the stroke of dinner. India, who made 377 in the first innings after being asked to bat, played 35 overs in the second innings before declaring after tea to set Australia an improbable 272-run target in just 32 overs. Shefali Verma made a fine 52 of 91 balls, while Poonam remained unbeaten on 41 of 62 balls. Smriti Mandhana was named the player of the match for her excellent innings of 127 in India's first ever pink ball match. That's it then in Newsnight for now. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.